Morning, everyone. We'd like to welcome everyone to our Sunday morning, December 6th Bible study before our worship service. We'd like to thank all of our friends, family, and visitors in our church family for joining us this morning with your attendance and in advance your participation. Much appreciated. We are doing the survey of the Old Testament. We have been doing this for a little bit of time now. Right now, we are moving on towards we're moving on towards lesson 6, instructional psalms. Lesson 6, instructional psalms, and we'll be pulling from Psalms chapter 1 today. Psalms chapter 1 today. If you're following along with us in your book, we're on page 9. If you don't have a book, that's okay. We're mostly going to be Psalms 1 and Psalms 37, those two chapters. We are bouncing around a little bit the way that the author of our book has this set up, which is okay. We were doing it based off of concept, not chronological order of the Psalms that are in your Bible. So that's kind of the breakdown there. Okay, if we wouldn't mind, can we have one of our church members start us off with chapter 1 of Psalms? Just a quick reading of chapter 1 of Psalms. Psalms chapter 1. Let's have a quick reader for that.
I'll read.
Thank you.
Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law he meditates day and night. He shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that brings forth its fruit in its season, whose leaf also shall not wither, and whatever he does shall prosper. The ungodly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, and the way of the ungodly shall perish.
All right, thank you so much. All right, obviously this is the first Psalm, so it must have some importance, but it's also going to have importance for setting the tone for this instructional Psalms lesson for us today. Okay, let's jump right in for the sake of time because we got off to a late start. Let's describe the character of the righteous man as set forth in verses 1 and 2. Right, it's critical for us when we're looking at the Bible to make sure, even if we have some understanding of the text that we're already looking at, that we dive into the essence of the author, the audience, and the purpose of that section of scripture. Because sometimes if we go into scriptures, even though we may know them verbatim from memory with preconceived notions, it could alter our personal or group study. So just for the sake of this study, let's look at verses 1 and 2 and put our mind into the characteristics of the righteous man based off of what David, this author, is saying, right? Not just a concept throughout Genesis to Revelations of righteousness, but verses 1 and 2. What is the characteristics of the righteous based off of verses 1 and 2? Just 1 and 2. What does David say the righteous man is? Or you can also flip it to say isn't, based off of what it says. What are some things that it may leave out? Right? So you may answer that either way your brain processes things. What is the righteous man? What is he or what is he not? Based off of just verses 1 and 2. What is the righteous man? What is he or is not? Based off of verses 1 and 2. Yes, Sister Nadine.
Seems to me like the psalmist is saying that the person who does not mingle with, who does not associate with the sinners, scornful, and the ungodly people are blessed. Also, if he finds his delight in God's law and in the Lord himself, that he focuses on the law daily instead of his communication with the sinful people around him.
Okay, so let's talk about the daily communication first, and then the setting, the personal setting of the people around him second, right? So this communication daily, right? This is the end of verse 2. In his law, his being God, capital H, he lowercase h, meaning the righteous person, meditates daily or ponders daily, day and night, right? This brings me in my mind back to the Deuteronomy passage that talks about making sure that as individuals, as the nation of Israel, as parents, right, to make sure in chapter 6, Deuteronomy verses 4 through 11, this same section that Sister Nadine just reread to us in verse 2, it reminds me of this. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your might. And these words which I command you today shall be in your heart. You shall teach them diligently to your children. You shall talk to them when you sit in your house, when you walk by the way, when you lie down, when you rise up. You shall bind them as a sign on your hand. And they shall be as fortlets between your eyes. You shall write them on the doorposts of your house and on your gates. So that kind of sounds like this verse 2. He meditates day and night, right? It's all encompassing. So that's the first part. And then Sister Nadine said context, right? Because this is important too, not to just assume, oh, okay, we already know that. And here's why. Context it matters. If I can go off to a remote place and focus on spiritual things alone by myself is a way different than what we're talking about here. Reason why we need to highlight that, because that is a religious belief. Some people believe in different religions that is the way to kind of separate yourself really from the world and go be righteous in and of yourself alone. Now, I have to be honest, I would probably get further righteously that way, but that's not the way. In the world, but not of it. So this individual is in the world, but not of it, meaning his surroundings may not be godly, but he is striving to be godly, right? And I would hope we would agree that's very difficult, right? Because it's when you, I mean, if I can manage my own thoughts, I'll do well. If I can manage my thoughts in the midst around other people's thoughts and actions, it just makes it harder because now I have to be mindful of my reaction to other people's actions. And that just makes being a Christian even more difficult, or being righteous even more difficult. So this person, he doesn't walk in the counsel of the ungodly, so it's not a regular occurrence. He doesn't stand in the path of sinners, not a regular occurrence. He doesn't sit at the seat of the scornful, not a regular occurrence, but he's aware of those things because he's in the world, but not of it, right? And that's something that his light, when we get to the Beatitudes and Jesus talking about letting your light shine, or 1 John, only way the dark can see your light is if the light is around darkness. So the point is, Jesus said, you are a city on a hill. You're a light. You can't just take a light and hide it. What purpose would that be? So that's this whole concept that we're alluding to from the New Testament of in the world, but not of it. But it's just exuding your righteousness to the world, basically, so that other people can see it, benefit from it, replicate that, have the desire to be righteous as well. Okay, what else? Anything else? Any other characteristics of the righteous man, what he is or is not, based on verses 1 and 2? What he is or is not. Keeping in mind that Deuteronomy passage about all-encompassing, loving God in every aspect, keeping in mind this concept of day and night meditation. What does that mean for my comings and goings, my everyday interactions, not Sunday morning and Wednesday for our understanding, right? We know this was written in the Old Covenant, but not in a matter of Bible study and worship. What is this telling me that Ellis has to be righteous when? What other settings on Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday night, right? My phone, my email, my social media. What is this telling Ellis, right? Use me as the example, right? What is this telling me? If Ellis wants to be righteous, what does this mean for my comings and goings in everyday life? right? Are there any restrictions I have, any changes I need to make? Does it matter where I go, who I talk to, who I'm around? Does it matter who I'm not talking to, who I'm not around in these two verses? Is there any indication to that of what Ellis needs to be doing on a daily basis? Right? We have this meditation. That's a action item for me. I'd have to leave this class and think about, do I dedicate my mind, right? That's why I like my study Bible translates meditates to ponders by talking to himself. So I have to admit, okay, I don't do that enough because this is talking about day and night. So that's one action item for me, right? But that's a personal study. What else is this talking about in terms of my action? When I'm not personally studying the Bible, is verse 1 giving me any indication of what I should or should not be doing? Anybody?
Yeah, I would say what really sticks out to me is blessed is the man that walketh not in the counsel of the ungodly. That really sticks out to me. First of all, this is like one of my favorite chapters in the entire Bible, because this is just like very instructional. And it's something that I've used throughout my life to draw inspiration from. But when we talk about walking in the counsel of the ungodly, that's important because not all advice is good advice, and not all advice is godly advice. So, it's important the people that we get our advice from and who we have as our counsel, right? Counsel in many instances is a lawyer, right? You got to be careful the kind of lawyer that you have when in terms of a formal court setting, right? Because a lawyer could either steer you in the right direction or steer you into prison. So like when I think about counsel and ungodly counsel, that really just reminds me that I have to be careful about the people that I'm around, who I'm soliciting advice from, and if those people are godly people that can give me advice based on what the Bible says. Many times we get advice based off of how someone feels or their fears or hurts or projections, but godly counsel is based off of advice and wisdom that comes directly from God and the Bible.
Yeah, so let's talk about that, right? Let's use the same example for legality, right? Because counsel, literally the definition, the two aspects of the definition is what Brother Kirk just alluded to in his whole explanation. The first is advice, especially formally given, right? Not just even random. And he talked about that. Then his example from a law standpoint is the second definition of the word counsel, the lawyer or lawyers conducting a case. Let's look at it between a public defender and a high price lawyer, right? If you had the choice financially, you would probably choose the high price lawyer because you would feel the public defender may not have your best interests in mind or able to have the resources to further your case. So therefore, you wouldn't just pick random counsel. You wouldn't just go into the phone book or on the internet or just pass a billboard and say, oh, okay, let me just pick a random lawyer, right? It would be nothing random about it unless your situation limited you to that, right? So that's that same concept. If we take that from his example and apply it to our everyday life, why do we take random advice from people who don't have the tools to help us? There are people in your phone and on your social media that we take advice from that have no tools to be giving advice, right? And we do that all the time. So before we discount what he's saying, how many decisions, I'm talking about life decisions people make. I used to sell cars. People used to ask me, what color should I get? Who am I? What color do you like? They'll be like, oh, I don't know. What should I get, a sedan or a SUV? I'm like, those are two major differences. What utility do you have for this vehicle? People used to let me decide what car that they're going to pay for. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense to me. Now, just think of everyday logical decisions, we get persuaded by things we see on the internet, on TV, friends, family, and we'll go and make a whole decision, right? You get to the restaurant, hey, what's good here? The server, how could the server answer that? I mean, what if I like spicy food and you don't? I'm going to say all the spicy things. And people say, okay, well, what you said sounds good. I'll have that. Those are comical things. We can't make decision in food. But imagine real life decisions that somebody may ask, why did you do that? And if I drill down, I might say, man, I didn't even do that because of someone I knew. I just did that because I seen someone else doing that. And we get on kids and adolescents and teenagers for peer pressure, but we get sucked into that. I was talking to a friend of mine 2 days ago about how adults will get sucked into, just as a topic of the day, not wearing a mask because they may walk into a room and the other adults don't have a mask. Don't we chastise teens about peer pressure? And now you have grown men and women who went somewhere to wear a mask, not wearing the mask because they feel uncomfortable because they'll be the only person in that setting who would have a mask on. That's like, think about what we're talking about. If I can't stand on decision making in those things, God forbid, to his point, I start taking actual advice, like legit counsel from people who are not scripturally sound or have a godly presence. And somebody say, Ellis, why did you do that? Oh, I talked to a couple friends and they said, I should do what makes me happy. Oh, where did you get that from? Well, those are my friends. I listen to them. But what about Bible, prayer? And no, I felt like God put those people in my life for a reason. So therefore they told me it's okay. So I did it. See, I have to be honest with a comment like that to think about me. Oh, am I persuaded by that way that I would let the ungodly dictate my decision making, right? The reason why I'm making it personal about friends is because those are the individuals that I would most likely take counsel from, right? Like, it's not that I'm just going to go, me personally, I'm talking about, to random people in the street or in the highways and the byways, but not all of my friends are godly. That's why I have to be honest with you all in a group setting to make it personal so that you can do the same in your own observation. Therefore, what counsel do I take from my ungodly friends? Am I persuaded by their counsel? Like, do I put weight on their advice over sound godly advice? And that's something where you can't answer that in a group. You have to answer that from a personal setting. This comment, right, based off of this, a brother saying, oh, I use this in my own life. Look what he's using, because verse 1 and 2 is telling us how should we be interacting. Ellis, you shouldn't walk in that counsel. You should walk in the light, 1 John, as Jesus is in the light. Oh, so that I could have some communion with God. Oh, okay, that's way different. There's things that I do on a regular basis, life decisions that I make, that if you ask me, is it according to what you want to do / what friends told you, or 1 John? I got to tell you, listen, this had nothing to do with walking in the light as Christ is in the light. I have to be honest. So my everyday decision making, is it persuaded by righteousness, or do I compartmentalize righteousness to say these are life decisions and these are church decisions? See, these are righteous decisions versus these are life decisions. Therefore, I don't need to consult God about these life decisions because these are just Monday things. This is not Sunday things. See what I'm saying? We compartmentalize those things, and therefore it's hard for us to be righteous on a continual basis because we're not applying these things day and night to all of our decision makings. Sister Nadine?
I was going to talk about that John, 1 John, that you talk about walking in the light, because it's not just not listening to people, right? It's basically the opposite of what in John, where the Lord says, abide in me. This is people who are constantly in the counsel of these ungodly. I mean, we all have ungodly people around us. And sometimes, you know what? There are our parents, there are siblings, sometimes there are spouses.
Mhm.
So it's not that you cannot, you won't be able to, you're not listening to them because you can't help but hear them sometimes. But the thing is, God is setting a standard, I think, for us to say that you're not going to abide in these ungodly counsel. You're not going to walk constantly in them. You're not going to sit. These verbs, the standing, the walking, the sitting, to me means that you're setting yourself in them. You're abiding in them. That you're not moving away. It's
Mhm.
something that you're entrenched in. And he's saying that's not where your delight is. That's not where your blessing is going to be. Your delight and the blessing is going to be in God's law, meditating on His standards day and night. It's that pray without ceasing that it's talking about. And the other thing is that I love how the continuity from the Old Testament right into the New Testament, right? When God doesn't change. All of these are the same precept. It's the same standard that we're under in the New Testament, where we're supposed to be abiding in God. We're supposed to be walking in His counsel. We're supposed to be standing with Him or sitting with people who are of like standard, not with the others.
Yeah, I mean, you were talking about those verbs, those adjectives, right? I was thinking of like rooted or foundation, right? Like if you're a planner or you're sitting in a physical structure right now, right? So think of planning something where it take root, or wherever you're sitting right now, the foundation, right? Where is the foundation of the building you're in? Where are the roots to the tree if you looked outside, right? Is it rooted in strong ground or sand? Right, back to the Sermon on the Mount, right? Like where is my counsel rooted? Like where am I pulling my nutrients from to help me make my everyday decisions? See what we're saying? Like this is why this is important for self-reflection, because that matters. Because if I say, well, in 7 days, if I do an inventory, now that I think about it, I'm not really rooted in godly counsel on a regular basis. Even though I'm aware of these things, I'm not rooted in there. Meaning like my decision making, my foundation of my decision making isn't rooted in godly counsel. Okay, that's not something, we're not going to jump on you. That's a positive that you're thinking about that way. And you're making that inventory to say, you know what? Yeah, I do know these things, but now that I think about it, I'm not making decisions based off of these truths that I know. And that's that walking is action, right? Walking in the light. Therefore, I have to constantly be thinking about, where am I moving? What pathway am I moving on? My thought process. And this is something that, should help you in terms of drilling down. Because what I didn't want at the beginning of class is just say, okay, we know these things. I got to be a good person. I'm already that, or I'm already working on that, or that. That's too easy, right? Think about these things a little bit more robustly in your own life to say, okay, my decision making, where I work, where I live, how I dress, how I talk, what I eat, who I hang around, where do I go, what do I do for leisure? See what I'm saying? You may tell me that, what does Netflix have to do with what we're talking about? What does where I work see what we're saying? Like, it's drilled down. Because if we just talk surface level, most people say, yeah, I'm already a good person. So it's like it gives everyone a pass. But to study the Bible, sometimes you have to be uncomfortable, because you need to be doing an inventory in a selfless way during these type of lessons, to think about. And as we're going to move in a second to the question too, but compare and contrast, to think to yourself, okay, in these aspects, I'm actually doing very well in where I'm drawing my counsel from. But in these aspects, you're right, I'm not thinking about it too much. Is there areas of improvement for me to grow, so I don't stand in this pathway of sinners, so I don't sit at the seat of the scornful, right? Am I giving an ear? This reminds me of Romans. It's saying, like, listing, remember, it listed all those wrong things, but then also those that seen those things, were aware of those things, and didn't say anything about those things being wrong. And it said, you're wrong too, right? This is a paraphrase, of course. But the point was, you noticed that things were going on around you that were wrong, but you accepted them by turning a blind eye to them. this seat at the scornful is very detrimental, because it's very unlikely that you would persuade the scornful to stop being scornful. It's more likely that they would persuade you. This goes into Corinthians, bad company corrupting good morals, right? If I sit down and rest at that table, I'm going to be persuaded more often than not to be drawn away by the topic of discussion. And that's what that verse is talking about. So a couple of things to think about as our personal application. Brother Kurt?
Yeah. As we look at the verbs, I also look at the nouns. I think those are nouns as well. Like, as ungodly, sinners, and scornful. I feel like those are like very descriptive words, like, and very like, I don't know, to me, when I read those things, it's like very definitive what type of people this psalm is like imploring us to stay away from: the ungodly, sinners, and scornful. I mean, we are all these things in various forms or fashions at some point. But I think that what this defines is the unapologeticness of these types of people. And sitting in the seat of the scornful is like, again, like you were just saying, like adjusting to the environment and the atmosphere that you're in. But I look at the second verse, and what really sticks out to me is delight. Like there's a difference between like reading and studying the word, or just coming to church and just doing it for the mechanics of it. But to delight in the law of the Lord, that's almost like an oxymoron, because like people feel like it's so like tedious, or it's like such a task to like serve the Lord or do the things of God. But this person delights in the law of the Lord, and it's that delight that causes them to meditate in it day and night. It's not because they are necessarily doing it as just like a timely task, or like, they're forced to do it. This person delights in the law of the Lord, and they look forward to spending time with God. So I feel like that is like a super, super like important part and major key in seeing the fruit of God, right? Like, we should, like the next verse talks about the fruit never withering. It's because we're delighting in the things of God and in his presence.
Yeah, so that that word delight is something that we don't use too much in kind of our modern English, but it's something that is critical in using, because think about it, right? We're going to look at it from a world standpoint and then from a spiritual standpoint, right? There's a phrase, a saying, a concept when we talk about a difference between a job, a career, and a vocation, right? People say, if you find a passion that you love, you'll never work a day in your life. This is the world talking, right? So if you could find something where you say, this, I love doing this. Now that this, whatever the this is, if I don't feel that way and you feel that way, we could be doing the same job, career, vocation, but you have a delight in it that I don't have. Therefore, you beat me to work and you're enthusiastic about work and I'm dreading it and I'm on Indeed.com. That's the world would agree with that statement. Now let's look at it from a spiritual standpoint. What did Jesus say about the commandments? And we talked about First John mentions this as well in a different part of First John, going into chapters 4 and 5, about if you love me, you keep my commandments. And then First John was saying, what about the commandments? That they're not burdensome. Well, we may say, hold up, brother, don't speak for me. They kind of burdensome for me, right? Then that means that you're not in the delight category. That means that the same commandments, just like the same job, career, vocation, one person, now let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 1, one person can hear those commandments, hear that word, and there's power to them. Another person can hear the same commandments, the same word, not a different word, the exact same word, and it's a burden or it's a stumbling block to them. See, so that mindset is critical, because it's not just being aware that there are words somewhere written down. Even the demons recognize who Jesus was. That's not enough. We talked about this Wednesday night's class, the real application of belief, not just belief in, oh, okay, I believe there's a God. Not like that. So that delight is critical, because are we viewing it as a burden, as a list of do's and don'ts, or are we viewing it like a relationship? Now, I would hope in any level of relationship right now, depending on what type of relationship you have or the season in a relationship you have, it may be different. Let's say parents and children. As an adult child, I would hope you don't view the parental relationship as a list of do's and don'ts, because I would hope you've already transitioned out of that frame of mind into an adult. Now, as a teenager, I could understand how you view it that way, even though you shouldn't. But the whole point of that is, if you look at the parental relationship as instructional and as a guide, is way different than do's and don'ts, right? Yesterday, we were putting things together in the church building, right? A couple of times we had to look at the instructions. I would hope we weren't viewing the instructions as a list of do's and don'ts, even though that's what it was. We were looking at it as a guide so that things would work properly. See, why don't I, to go back to teenage years, look at my parents that way, as a guide? Why am I looking at them as keeping me from having fun? See what I'm saying about perspective? So his point is critical, because the same child under the same roof, under the same rules, if he or she changed the way they viewed those rules, of do's and don'ts to a guide, he or she would respond to them differently. See what we're saying? Now, when you become an adult, even if you viewed it as do's and don'ts, and you start thinking, okay, now I live on my own. Now it kind of makes sense about taking garbage out and washing dishes and coming home at a certain time and living a certain way. Now these things sort of kind of make sense because you're in a different stage of your life. But had you thought about that as a guide in the previous stage of your life, it would have made the reception of those rules to feel different. To me, that's where I look at that delight. I can't look at the Bible because it's talking about the law. So I can't look at the word, the Bible, as a list of do's and don'ts. I can't approach it that way, or the day and night reading is going to turn me off. I don't want to sit up reading do's and don'ts all day, me personally. Now, some people do. Like if you're a lawyer, right, as a vocation, as a career, then that approach is not burdensome to you. But to me, as a personality, I have to think of it as more of a relationship. And therefore, I got to see if God is already in the December 7th and I'm in December 6th. If God is telling me don't do something today, it's most likely 100% for my own good, not just randomly because he don't want me to do it. If I think of it that way, I as Ellis be more likely to say, okay, look, so I don't want to waste my time or God's time. I don't want to waste a whole December 6th, get to the December 7th, this is God's grace, and think back on the 6th and say, oh, I should have, would have, could have. That's regret. What if I can approach my day? We at the beginning of the day today. What if I can approach my day and think, God is telling me things to get me through the day. Therefore, now that counsel, go back to verse 1, makes a little bit more sense. Now this fruit, verse 3, makes a little bit more sense because the fruit is after drawing nutrients from the root in our earlier example. It's in the future sense, right? I would love to plant the seed and the fruit come out instantly. It doesn't work that way. If I put the seed in the wrong place and draw nutrients from the wrong soil, in the future, I would realize that the fruit was bad. And what will I say? I wasted my time. I planted in the wrong area. I didn't nurture the plant. I didn't tend to the plant. I failed, but time was wasted. Now I have to go back and replant, but I can't get that time back. That's the way I look at that. Now, let's say that on the other side, I did plant in the right place, fruit did bear, and then I let it wither. I can't get it back. I have to go to replant a whole new seed just to start the process over again, and then say, you know what, I'm going to use this fruit in a better manner this next time. But the time is gone, though. I can't get the time back. I can learn from the lesson, but I can't get the time back. So this is what I'm looking at these verses and these comments about the console and the balances. I have to look at it and say, wait a minute. I think I'm wasting a lot of my own time, right? Like if I look at it that way, I'm wasting a lot of my time, because what happens is someone will say something like in this class, or I'll read something. I think, okay, I shouldn't have done that. But how many times I got to keep saying I shouldn't have done that before those descriptive words, those adjectives are started to be applied to Ellis? Then what if, how many times do I have to keep doing ungodly things before God referred to Ellis as ungodly? See, that make me uncomfortable, because I always want God to view me as godly, even when I'm not acting godly. But he talked about those descriptive words. Right now, we're thinking of them as other people, right? Like, okay, I don't want to be around scornful sinners and ungodly. Those are them, the others. But once I'm around and I take my seat and I draw nutrients from advice from them, how much time has to go by before God says, this not us and them, is you are with them? That's where you are pulling your inspiration from. How many times do I have to tell God, no, that was a mistake. That wasn't like the real Ellis. That's not my normal thought process. I just got swayed away by that console. How many times before God can say, nah, I don't think so. Look like you kind of like being over there. Look like you kind of like drawing inspiration from there. Look like you kind of like that advice. Looks like you kind of like sitting there at that seat. It looks like you like that. And it now looks like I'm burdensome to you. See what we're saying? How long? Do you want to put a time frame on it? We don't like to think that way, right? Because we want to think of it as grace. But these two verses, well, let me stop saying two verses. These 6 verses is really about a personal aspect, right? I can be the one to move me from which side of the descriptive language to the other. That's what Romans is talking about, right? No creative thing gonna pull me away, but Ellis can pull Ellis away from God. See, so therefore, how often do I have to put my mind's eye, my focus on ungodly things before I in turn start to be ungodly? Because Kirk was talking about we're all of these things at different times, right? So it's like, that's the slipping part. Oh, okay, go, God forgive me. Sorry. But how many times do I got to slip before it becomes a pattern and a lifestyle? Then I stop asking for forgiveness. I forget to ask for forgiveness for some sin, because it becomes so second nature. I don't think of it as counsel of the ungodly. I just think of it as Monday or Saturday night. Like, this is just what people do. So therefore, once I reduce it to that, my mind is far from these verses. And that's what we're talking about, to get our mind back to thinking, do I act like this, or am I past this stage in my life? And again, that's a personal. Okay, anything else? We did do contrast. I'll read the question just in case we have anything else. Contrast the fate of the wicked to that of the righteous. What is the reason for the difference between the fate of the wicked and that of the righteous? This is what we were just talking about, verses 3 through 6. But anything related to that before we move on to 37? Anything about the fate, outcome? Anything about the outcome, verses 3 through 6? Talks about 3. Then in verse 4, it said, the godly are not so, but are like the chaff which the wind drives away. Therefore, the ungodly shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the ungodly shall perish. Brother Kurt.
Yeah, I think this is like the results of the seeds that were planted, right? Because God knows and sees all things, right? Sometimes I feel like, personally, right, like myself, like I gotta remember and know that I can't hide from God. Like nothing that I say or do or think is hidden from him. And he knows whether we thinking ungodly, doing ungodly, even if other people don't, right? So there are so many people that on the surface, on the outside, external, it looks like so good. It looks like people are winning and they're so successful and all these different things. but ultimately God knows the way of like the righteous and the unrighteous. So what this is saying is that those who are delighting in the law of the Lord and meditating in his word day and night, no matter what, you're going to win. No matter what, you're going to be successful. No matter what it looks like, because God is a righteous God. And I've never seen the righteous forsaken or his seed begging bread, right? So God is always going to like deliver his people. And we have a whole book that tells the story of him perpetually delivering his people. That's the story of Jesus Christ. But the ungodly are not so, and they shall not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregations of the righteous. It's just an amazing affirmation for me personally to know that if I stay in delight in the Lord, I win. You know what I'm saying? Like my heritage is winning. Jesus Christ defeated death, and that's my brother. Like, you know what I mean? So like, I am so like affirmed every time I read this chapter, because this is the outcome, and it's also the outcome for the people who are unrighteous and try to get over on us who tend to want to turn the other cheek or go the extra mile. This is the outcome for them as well. So I'm thankful.
Yeah, I mean that let's start at the latter part and then work our way back, right? That outcome is encouraging to us, right? Detrimental to others, but that keeping the faith is hard sometimes, right? So being reminded, because it says it in two places, it actually ends the chapter again with the outcome with the last section, but the way of the ungodly shall perish, right? Not to say that we're wishing death on others, but it is helpful as an affirmation to know doing the right thing isn't a waste of time in terms of eternity, right? And that's something that's critical. And then to the other points, I just thought of two really even famous verses, really, from what Brother Kirk was saying. I just, my mind went there because we were talking about those examples of planning and working, right? One is the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life in Christ Jesus our Lord. Okay, people can say Romans 6:23, we know that already. But let's think about it for what he was talking about, right? When you wages are what you earned, right? Like on Friday, if you get paid every week and you worked Monday through Friday 8 hours, your job owes you 40 hours times whatever hourly rate the two of you agreed on. You earned that, right? Like that's your wage. So when we look at these verses 3-6, both sides are earning their wage, right? Some people did A, some people did B, some people did narrow path, some people did wide path. They earned that. So when I start thinking about, okay, what did I earn? What about if I say, oh, I didn't know I was earning that? Then I think of James 4:17. Now, this is more personal to his point, and I'll piggyback off of that point. Therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. When he was talking, I thought about Jonah, because Jonah, when it was in the boat and there was a storm, a lot of people had gods in that boat, remember? And they start thinking, who somebody God got to be mad. What was Jonah talking about when they were talking about lots and trying to decide and doing the council? What did Jonah say? Listen, I got to keep it real with y'all. I know why this is happening. So you should throw me over the boat, because this is not going to end well. This is how I operate from knowing the Bible. This is me being personal, because I already know the Bible. I can't lie to you and say, oh, I don't know what I did. So they threw him over and a fish swallowed him, right? But God knew where Jonah was. See, like sometimes when you know the right thing and you do wrong, you think like this, like me. Well, I did the wrong thing, so I know God upset. He gonna punish me, and almost like que sera, sera. It is what it is. But God is saying, you're not just staying in no fish. I hope you don't think you still not gonna do what I asked you to do. God went and got him. God went and got Jonah out of that fish. See, where could Jonah go? Jonah knew, right? He knew everything. Listen, I already know what's happening. It's not like I'm confused. You all are confused. I know why this is happening. Here's the solution. You should throw me over. And when they threw him over, that was the solution for them, right? Wasn't that the solution for the people on the boat? Yes. But the story didn't continue with what happened to the people on the boat. It continued with Jonah because Jonah still didn't do what God asked. Therefore, where could Jonah go? If God sees all things, God not going to be like, oh, you know what? All right, Jonah knew he did wrong. So there, same thing as Samson. Samson still had to do what God asked, even though he was blind. God went and got him out of his blindness. He didn't leave him there. See, sometimes I do wrong and feel like, okay, that's my wages. That was wrong. So I knew that was wrong. I did it purposely. So God be upset. Hopefully he be in a better mood towards me soon. God sometimes say, no, not like that. That's not how we gonna play this. You still gonna do what I asked. Now I have to come get you. And he's gonna pursue those who he's trying to discipline and love. Okay, so therefore I can't hide in my wages of sin. Right? Like I can't hide there because he'll come get me out of my blindness or out of the belly of a fish to do his divine will. Now, on the full picture, that's hope for me because I think, well, if I stayed in that fish, I would perish. So I'm thankful when I look back that God got me. But I have to be honest, much like Jonah, when in the moment that he get me out of the fish, I'm not so thankful. Sometimes I'm actually upset. See, I'm upset that God came and got me. Why you didn't leave me in my sinful ways and let me have my fun? See how that is sometimes? We got to be honest. Looking back, we think God didn't leave me in that sinful state of mind. But in that moment, sometimes when loved ones come try to give us that advice, we snap at them instead of saying, you know what, you're right. So therefore, I have to think of the overall outcome of both lifestyles, godly and ungodly, righteous and unrighteous, the outcome. Therefore, Ellis, which outcome do you want to have? The ungodly shall perish. The Lord knows the way of the righteous. Whatever he shall do shall prosper. Which outcome do you want to have, Ellis? I want to have the prosper outcome. Okay. So therefore, in these sinful moments, back to slipping, back to falling, back to everyday sin, when God comes and gets you out of those moments, what attitude should you have? Like Jonah? No, I should be grateful you went and got me out of that fish because you could have left me there. Oh, so therefore I have to think about it from that point of view. Fritz and your family?
Unmute.
Yes, there you go.
Okay, so the second question there, the writer uses the word fate, but I don't think that's a biblical term. Fate is like fortune or destiny, but you may seal your fate, your destiny, by being unrighteous, by being wicked, and your fate will be you won't be able to stand, you won't be able to withstand standing before God. So I just want to clarify the question about fate.
Yeah, well, fate in this is outcome. This is your eternal destiny, where you're destined to go. Right? Like that's the sad thing. Like
just kill your fate.
Yes, exactly. Like and this is a more, I don't want to say philosophical, I'll say spiritual. This is a more spiritual discussion, this concept, because we'd have to go into the concept of in the New Testament definition of predestined versus the world's definition of predestined. So the world will say predestined mean when Ellis is born, there's nothing that he can do to change whatever predestined outcome that God has for him. This is why I say I won't say philosophical, I say spiritual, but this is high level. The biblical predestined is more of the concept of God already knows the decisions Ellis is going to make, and he's going to allow him to have his free will. Now let's go back to Jonah and Samson, but Ellis's free will would never supersede God's divine will. But Romans says that Ellis can decide. Beatitude says that Ellis can decide, and not just those two verses, of course, where I end up, right? And then the spiritual concept for that people argue about is the concept of once saved, always saved, right? Once I'm saved, is there anything I can do to pull myself out of God's graces for eternity, right? Some people say no. The Bible through verses says yes. There's different examples we can use. Reason why I'm saying it's more spiritual, because we'd have to dive deeper into those things like we just briefly explained, the difference of how the world views destiny, fate, predestined, and how the Bible is talking about it. The difference between God's divine will and my individual free will, right? God's divine will is that all men be saved. Okay. God's divine will for my life may be a specific thing, and I may achieve that specific thing, and still my free will put me on a path of unrighteousness, even though that's not God's will. It wasn't God's will that I perish, but God gonna allow my free will in my personal eternity state to dictate. But he won't allow my free will to interrupt his divine will for his plan of salvation for others, right? So therefore, I can remove myself based off of my actions from God's good graces. And if I stay in that state and fate, and I perish from this life to the next, I transition from this life to the next, then where is the sealing at? Is it sealed in righteousness, or is it sealed in unrighteousness? That's when, if I pass in that state of mind, those of you who know me will say what? Well, God have mercy on his soul. If somebody say, why y'all saying it like that, right? You won't want to say, but you're going to know what? Ellis, when he was living a certain way, was not how he was living before. So therefore, now we pray, God have mercy, because what could we say? Because in the state in which he perished was not in God's good graces. See what we're saying? Now, again, it's difficult. That's why I'm using me as the example, because it's difficult to think that way. But we catch ourselves and say that. Even parents say that all the time about living children. You know, God bless them. Children doing what they want to do, but parents up praying for them, right? Because the parents know, just like Job, that they're not living the right way. So the parent is praying that their wages in that moment are not cashed in, that God don't give payment on Wednesday. The parent is hoping, God, let them get to Friday. I hope when they wake up Thursday, they look, you know what, the first half of the week, I didn't work too well. I'm going to change my approach. That's what parents, godly parents, be praying for their kids. But the kids are in ignorant bliss, because mostly we're doing what we want to do, right? So that is what we are looking at too. But it's a good comment, because we have to think about that in its totality, right? Not just for those who don't know God, who choose not to have a relationship with God. We also have to think about those of us who have a relationship with God, but choose to no longer have a relationship with God. Therefore, I may say, no, my fate, my destiny is with God, because I'm already saved. And we may say, no, you misapplying this from the world's view. His comment was like, no, brother, you got to think about sealing your fate. Oh, what you mean sealing? Like the roof? No, sealing, like closing up. Where are you going to end up, Ellis? On the perishing side or the prosperous side? Oh, I don't want to think about that. But this is what the culmination of this chapter is forcing us to talk about as a totality, not just one side. It's a balanced chapter. It's telling us the good and the bad, the positive and the negative, the righteousness and the unrighteousness, the present state and the future eternal state. And where will we end up? That's why lesson 6, instructional Psalms, it's no wonder the author started with this first Psalm, right? Because this class was about instructions, right? It's talking about what instructions do we have to live a certain way. The instruction manual to put this thing together called life the right way. And I think this is what we've been drawing from the comments so far. Sister Nadine?
And I just wanted to mention that, these are, we're not just sent down whatever path, like David was saying, in terms of fate, F-A-T-E. The fate means that it's a natural outcome of your own actions, right? So we saw that actions of the man who is blessed in him, meditating on the Lord day and night, and where his delight was. And we saw how it was with the ungodly in verse 4 following, in that how they are. It's their personal action that allows for their outcome. So we're not passively going through life, or we shouldn't be passively going through life. All of these depend on our actions. Do we embrace the standards that God set for the godly people, or do we embrace the standards of the ungodly? So we're not just passively going through and we end up wherever, as the Greeks considered fate, that's where you're destined to go. We are active participants in our own life.
Yeah, and that's why that concept of wages is so critical in my mind's eye, my understanding, because that's something that I worked for, that I earned. I can't earn your wages. Now, if you make more than me, I'd like to, right? I'd like to get your check, but that's not how financial system work. And the same thing from spiritual, right? The rich man would like to have gotten Lazarus' check, but that's not how that works. See, you got your check, right? What did Abraham say? In your life, you had a lot of good things. You lived your life, and Lazarus had a lot of bad things. He lived his life. So what are you asking me? I'm asking you to give me Lazarus' earnings. Oh, well, sweetheart, that don't work that way. See what we're saying? Now, let's go back to parents. Parents sometimes will wish that, even if you go to Romans chapter 2, what did Paul say? Paul said he wished he could barter with God. Think about this for a second, and give up his own salvation for his family, culture, family. Now, some people read that and say, ooh, brother, that's too much. I mean, I like black people like everyone else. I don't know if I want to give up eternity for all black people. But what was his point, though? Because parents can understand what Paul's talking about. He's saying it's a sacrifice. Parents sometimes wish if it was just let me have that, but God gonna say it doesn't work that way. Each person to work out his or her own salvation in fear and trembling, and whatever life that person choose to live, the outcome is based off of his or her actions, thought process, words, and deeds, because that's how I design that. And that's a hard pill to swallow when you're thinking about other loved ones, but also about yourself at different times. That's why I said it's so important when you come out of that state of mind that you're so joyful and thank God that he didn't call you in that state of mind. A lot of people have that testimony. In the summertime, we were talking about this in a different context of class, and a couple of the church family members were giving their comments saying, I thank God he didn't call me during different stage of my life. Like they were giving their testimony to say, listen, how I live now is not how I lived before. And some of the members were saying, I knew better then. It's not like I can lie to y'all and say I didn't know. Some people said I knew, I fell away, and thank God I came back. That was a testimony to hear that, to think, oh, okay, yeah, you know what? That's true. Because if I would have been called in that state of mind, where would I have been? What earnings would I have received? And that's why it's important to think that way. And it may seem like, why are we sitting up here in the latter part of class talking about fate and things like that? Because we have to be all encompassing. We have to make sure we touch every aspect of the thought process. You are driving, right? You're actively driving your life, and that's what people want, right? That's the truth. We have to be honest. And God is saying, if you choose to go down some pathway that I told you not to go down, the results of that will be on you. I'm not making you do that. You have that choice to follow these instructions or not. And that's the choice that each person has. And that's what God has set up. Brother Kirk, and then we'll close here. We'll go to 37 next week.
Yeah, I just wanted to echo that, because it's super important that we recognize that, like, we all make choices, right? And nothing in this scripture says that it would be easy, or that it's a smooth path, or just do this and then all these automatic doors open up for you. This is about endurance, and what I like about this is that in verse 3 it talks about like a tree being planted, right? So that means you got to be rooted and firm in these choices, right? You can't just make a choice like I'm going to follow the Lord. And then when, Jesus talks about it, when all the storms and things come about, like your house falls. This is about being rooted and planted. And then it goes on to say that, you'll bring it forth his fruit in his season, right? So my season might not be your season, or your season might not be my season. But the point is, we're all going to bring forth fruit if we stay planted and rooted in the choice that we make every day to follow the Lord. So this actually is very instructional about like our faith walk every day. And yeah, I think that is ultimately what leads to the fate that we're ultimately talking about. But these are everyday choices that the psalmist is telling us to make, and what the results of that will be. And again, in his season, that doesn't mean that like everyone's going to be fruitful at the same time in the same way, and I think that it's important that we understand the process of the choice.
Yeah, I use sports as an analogy all the time with this frame of mind. You can also use combat, but let's use sports, because when I think of season and the choices, right, I just naturally think of sports. That's just the way my mind goes, right? Everyone can't win every season, right? Because that would defeat the purpose of sports. Now, I know new age is every kid get a trophy. I don't subscribe to that. I think that as a child, when I realized I lost, it will help me to win. If you reward me for losing, this is just my own concept. I don't grow, Ellis, from that. When I realize that I lost and the other kids are celebrating, I should think about the choices I made and the times I didn't practice. Because see, we all had the same amount of time. The kids who won and Ellis who lost, we had the same time, right? Last season to this season was the same amount of time. I have to think back and say, you know what? I can picture several days, weeks, or even months where I didn't practice. I made active choices to do something else. And now the wages of that nonchalant attitude towards that sport is I lost. Now the other kids can say, we dedicated the last 12 months to this sport. So shouldn't they win? They made a sacrificial choice of their time. They sacrificed their time and their body to focus on a goal that they achieved. They won. The earnings of that choice, they won. I lost. Now, next season, I might win. It may be my season now because I may have needed that loss to win. The other kids may not have needed that motivation. The other kids could have just been motivated by the concept of winning. Now think of this spiritually. That's the same way. Some people get on the righteous path. They don't never deviate from that path. Some of us get on, fall off, get on, fall off, get on, fall off. We need that. Why? It's just you. You got to look at you in the mirror. Why you need to learn that way versus someone else learning another way. You have to look in the mirror. That's just how your mind is wired. So therefore, am I making the choices in practice to be a winner when it's game time? Well, no, game time, if you look at the NBA season starting up now, that's in June. I can't think about June. It's December. See? Some people been thinking about June in the NBA since last June. Some people are going to say, I can't think about June because it's too far away. Some people are going to practice today who are in the NBA as if June is tomorrow. See what we're saying? They're going to make a choice right now. And other NBA players are going to think about Christmas time. See, they're going to be like, it's almost holiday time. What am I going to do? And another player going to forget it's Christmas time because their focus is going to be on June, the finals. And if we live and Christ don't return, a team is going to win in June, but not every team, because some teams are going to make a sacrifice. They're going to make a choice to dedicate themselves to a goal, and they're going to achieve that goal. And some aren't. And if I look at it from that way, I have to be honest and say, okay, there's times where I blatantly make the wrong choice spiritually. I can't blame y'all for that. I have to be honest and say, some of y'all told me not to make that choice, and I made it anyway, and I kept making it. Therefore, when I see some of you winning spiritually, I start thinking, oh, I want to win spiritually. I have to do an inventory of my poor choices and think to myself, wait, I got to use this as a life lesson to persuade me to make better choices. Some people, they do make the better choice and they win in their season. Other people get upset and say, you know what? This is not for me. I don't got time to be thinking about good times, good choices, feeling bad, got to do better. I want to live my life. And they leave. And that's the world that we live in. So again, you can use any analogy, of course, but that's the analogy that I use because I'm into sports, and it makes sense because sports has the same wording for seasons, not the same context. And I have to think in my mind, the choices that I'm making now dictate that future aspect, right? I mean, I don't know when I'm going to pass, but I just, I don't think about that. I'm thinking about today, right, Ellis? The things you do today, though, is going to dictate where you go when you pass on from this life to the next. That's why you have to think about that today. In order to win, at the end of the season, you have to think about your goal at the beginning of the season and every day during the season so that it will help you and persuade you to make better choices. Okay, we're, for the sake of time, since 37 is a long chapter, we'll do that next week. So put a marker there. We'll do Psalm 37 next week, a psalm for the fretful. Questions 3, 4, and 5 we'll touch on next week if you want to read that in advance. We most likely will not make it to Psalm 119 next week. So if you want to just spend your time reading 37, that's great. If you do have extra time, read Psalm 119, 127, and 128. Want to thank all of those who had comments and Bible readers. Much appreciated. Thank our friends, family, and visitors for joining us on YouTube. We're going to end our session now here and start up our YouTube and Zoom session for our worship service in just a few moments. And we ask that you join us as we transition into our worship service at this time.